Welcome, everybody, to this week's edition of Pluralia Dialogos, where I'm very happy to be joined by my good friend Gardner and very soon Alex Krainer, who just hopped into today's studio. Alex, how are you guys doing today?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you. And you?
Good. Yeah, you'll slip in right at the last minute. That's very good. You're a showman. All right. So, guys, I want to ask you guys a lot. I brought you both on because you're both brilliant analysts. You got a good sense of history. You got a good sense of the future. And you both have a certain faith in humanity, which I think is sometimes lacking in our otherwise cynical, black-pilled world that requires desperately some sense of, like, what do we do? That being said, it doesn't mean that the battles currently in play are in any way guaranteed. There's a lot of challenges. We've had a very busy opening couple of weeks of 2026. Everybody, I think, has been paying more attention than they thought they were going to about the world situation, starting with Venezuela, major ruptures going on there, major shifts, followed up by a potential blowing up of Iran, which seems to have simmered down. We've got new accelerated discussions around the Arctic, around Greenland, around Canada's destiny within something much, much bigger. And then you've got a fight over different ideas of what this new system is going to be. I think both of you gentlemen are pretty much on board with the idea that a new system is coming online, but who will it serve? What interests will it represent? Hall, you recently wrote an article on BRICS++ challenging U.S. hegemony. It's a fantastic article. So far, I've read most of it, 80% of it. And you just published this, yesterday? So you're making the point right now that there's a race around the BRICS++ groupings that are fighting for this new system. And then on the other hand, you have certain older vested interests. Could you say a little something about where do you think we are right now in that context as a big question? And then we can go into more specifics with Alex as we open up our conversation today.
Yeah, well, first point, just one thing you left out, which no one in the world's talking about, is we're in the biggest arms race in the history of humanity, and the New START treaty is expected to expire February 8th, unless it's renewed. And Trump seems to be nowhere. He hasn't prepared anything, as far as I can tell, or the Arms Control Association, my reference, for a new treaty of any kind, or how he plans to bring China or other states into it. So in my view, we are walking into a massive arms race. We already begun that with the deployment of intermediate range missiles. The Russians are rusty, how do you pronounce it, intermediate range missile used against Ukraine twice now. This is a nuclear capable missile, hypersonic now. Putin threatened to build this. We just read for my next book, I'm working on this subject. He threatened that way back in 2008, in April 2008, directly to George Bush, that this missile was a better way to counter missile defense systems than developing Russia's own missile defense systems. I looked at the word up. Well, I'll talk about that later. But anyway, that's my first problem. I'm afraid we're moving into a massive arms race. In terms of the BRICS, and then there's the other dimension of this new warfare between the U.S., Russia, and China is the economic front. And certainly the building of the BRICS was totally unforeseen by the White House way back in 1997, 2000, when they started the NATO expansion. And that was threatened back in 97, 98, that if you expand NATO, Russia's going to turn closer to China, India, and other states. And Primakov started the new multipolarity movement and what was called the RICS, Russia, India, China first, and then it became the BRICS, so Brazil and South Africa added. Now, my God, I don't know how many states have applied. It's in my article. So those two dimensions of this war are intensifying. Both are Trump's only tools in this war tend to be tariffs. And he's using them against both Russia, China, as well as U.S. allies in Europe. Now threatening tariffs if Denmark doesn't give up Greenland to him or allow him to seize Greenland in some way or somehow pressure Greenland into American hegemony. So those he's using primarily old-fashioned geopolitical tools of military force and pressure to counter what are deeper economic trends, and in the long run, that doesn't work. I would argue that the economic factors will win out unless we get a war and then a whole new thing starts over. So I can leave it at that, and then.
Yeah, that's a pretty big, general thumbnail sketch, which I was going for. So, Alex, same sort of question to you as a big general assessment in your mind right now. Do you agree in general that there is this conflict going on between Trump and the BRICS plus nations over what the new system is going to be, or do you think that there's a greater degree of behind the scenes collusion working together to make something positive out of this seeming chaos?
Well, on the facade of issues, it does appear to be that way. However, I'm not completely convinced that this is correct. If we go back to last January, we had Marco Rubio give testimony to the Senate in his confirmation hearings, and he said that the way Trump administration looks at the world is that the post-World War II global order is obsolete. He said more than obsolete. And he said that it's been weaponized against us. And then in the same testimony, he said that the new reality are multipolar integrations. And in that sense, I think that, well, on the premise that Marco Rubio was being sincere in those statements, and I don't see why he wouldn't be. I think that the United States is going to be looking for ways to be a partner with the BRICS movement. But, given what we know about Trump and probably an entrenched sort of a mindset that is probably still there in the minds of many, many U.S. officials, maybe most of them, the United States has to lead the pack. So, BRICS on condition that we lead. Looking at all the conflicts that have erupted around the world since Donald Trump took power, or, that have festered around the world, a lot of it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. The intervention in Venezuela, abduction of Nicolas Maduro, Trump's strange peace initiatives in the Middle East, his seeming commitment to regime change in Iran, his seeming commitment to the security of the State of Israel, his relationship with Russia, which seems to be fluctuating from hostile to friendly on a weekly basis. It seems like madness, but I think there's method to the madness. And the farther I look and the deeper I research into what's going on, the more convinced I'm becoming that he is taking on the old global order, the post-World War II global order, that he's absolutely demolishing it. And then I think that the relationship between the United States and BRICS is yet to be defined. And I think that it's going to be defined inevitably in partnership with Russia and China, because if you're going to embrace the multipolar integrations, then your partners are Russia and China, primarily. And that's who you're going to have to talk to. And, as Sergei Karaganov said, the way the Russians see it is that they have to help the United States transition from being a global hegemon to being one of the major powers in the world in the way that's least disruptive as possible. So I think that this is the process we are observing in the world, and I do have a very, very strong impression that the actual target of the Trump administration is the old global order led by the United Kingdom, the undead British Empire. And if we scratch below the surface and also ignore Trump's public antics, because that'll give you brain injury if you go by that, I find more and more substance to that idea.
Paul, so based on what Alex just said, I know in your recent article you pointed out the C5 proposition that Trump. Okay, yeah. So he put forth the C5 proposition. To what degree that's serious, I'm not too sure, but apparently it came out in the first draft of like the foreign security doctrine for the United States, and that was just put out a few weeks ago, December, I guess. And it called for, I guess, it's U.S., Russia, China, India, and Japan as the potential five.
Yeah. Yeah, and it leaves out the Europeans. This is where I was going to tend to agree with Alex, except that this was taken out. This is too controversial, in my view, for the American public to see that in an official document that the United States is really excluding the Europeans and going to agree with Russia, China, work with Russia, China, India, and Japan as the primary powers. And therefore, I'm a bit worried that I do agree in general that the United States has to make amends and reconcile with both Russia and China. Otherwise, we're going to be in a disaster. I just don't see it happening yet. And I don't see Trump's policies leading in that direction yet. They certainly didn't do it in his first term. And while I agree with his rapprochement with Russia, as Alex said, he flip-flops back and forth. One minute he's pro-Russia, next minute he's against. And that's why I mentioned the arms race, because he really needs to get a deal with Putin on the arms at some point. Otherwise, the arms themselves will become an issue that will disrupt any kind of rapprochement that we will try to make. The main thrust I see Trump still going after China. That's his main problem. As long as that happens, China itself will find ways to counter Trump's efforts to contain it or put higher tariffs on it. There's the Taiwan dispute, the geopolitics of that. I believe it's perfectly possible for Taiwan and China to make a deal with U.S. and international backing. However, I don't see Trump moving in that direction. I do see him aiming everything, his attack on Venezuela, effort to blockade Venezuela, and Iran is more direct against China than anybody else. This has to be understood. He wants to cut the links that China has already, China's moved into Latin America. And now the Europeans have made the Mercosur agreement. The United States is feeling isolated in its own backyard, so-called backyard, which is really its front yard, depending on how you look at it. Therefore, I think Trump is desperate. I think that's why he's erratic. He doesn't know which way to go, because it's not multipolarity. That's a really ideological term. It's a whole range of different threats on different levels that's undermining American hegemony, and that's a reality. I agree. I agree. American hegemony is falling. And I agree with the comment of, that it needs to be managed in such a way, and the United States has to be led to understand that it has to step back from global hegemony. Britain had to do that before World War I, and we still got World War I. And the United States, it's got to step back from this hegemony. Otherwise, we will have World War III or IV, however you count it. And therefore, my problem is here, it's not the criticism of anything. I just don't see Trump moving. He's so erratic and provocative that he's destroying his own, not only his international reputation, international trust, but domestic trust. The Americans are furious. An ICE agent kills a woman in the car with no provocation. I mean, this is tearing American society apart. And the Trump people just whitewashing. And that's why I say domestically he's losing support, and internationally no one trusts him. Look what he's doing. Look at the protest in Denmark and in Greenland against his new threats to Greenland. I just see he's alienating the Europeans, and in my view, he's not gaining support from Russia or China either.
Well, I share your concerns, Hall. I hope that Alex is right, but Alex, let me throw this at you. It does seem like there could be much more less destructive paths that could be taken if, like, for example, I mean, in the case of Venezuela, we've had tankers that were, bound for Russia that were confiscated, one of which, with the help of the British working with the Americans to confiscate that tanker full of oil that was part of the Shadow Fleet. I think that there's been 3 or so far. And it does seem, at least, that the language of justifying what was done in Venezuela has a lot to do with blocking the influence of Russia and China. We know that Venezuela had made its interests even known to join the BRICS at some point. That seems counterproductive if the idea is to have good, positive economic relations with Russia and China. So I'm wondering, also, I guess the discussion on the Greenland front, a lot of that seems to be pushed in such a manner that it is vectored around trying to stop Russia and China from having influence in Greenland. So it doesn't seem productive in that sense, and it seems like better ways could be done. But what's your take on those problems?
Well, that's exactly it. It seems counterproductive. It just doesn't make sense. Mm. And at the surface level of things, it would seem that Trump is attacking the influence of Russia and China in Latin America. And then, there's this reassertion of Monroe Doctrine from the new national security strategy. And it would appear, it actually states that it's targeting Chinese influence in the region. But if we look at what all this entails, it seems like a very, very risky gambit to achieve something that could much easier be obtained in negotiations and discussions. Say, okay, you have very large, very significant investments here. Of course, we can't just kick you out willy-nilly. Let's see how we will agree to share our influence in this region. That would be the easy way to do things. No, Trump effects this extraordinarily risky stunt by abducting Maduro and taking him to the United States to stand trial. And the whole thing looks very suspect, because it would have to have been the most perfect military operation ever conducted in the history of the Milky Way galaxy. And I am convinced that it was based on a deal. And sure, then we heard about the killed all the Cuban guards that were killed, and the bombs were dropped. But still, it's a massively unlikely story. Trump has been saber rattling in the Caribbean for 4 months at that point. In those 4 months, a nation under siege would already have taken very extensive precautions to protect its government, particularly its president. Meaning, you would set up radars, right? You would have advanced notice if any boat, aircraft, helicopter was approaching, and at that point you'd probably extricate the president in the space of about 3 seconds. None of this happened. They even dropped bombs on Caracas on their way in, and nobody woke up. Nobody took any measures, and they just picked him up together with his wife, which is not an irrelevant fact in this whole. And then Maduro turns up in the United States, all smiles, hugging, wishing New Year's to his abductors, hugging, giving 2 thumbs up in a few photographs, a victory sign in other photographs. Doesn't look like a man who just got downgraded from the president of a country to a prisoner. So I suspect that this was a deal.
Okay.
Why? Now we have to ask ourselves why. And I suspect that it obviously has to do with drug smuggling, people smuggling, and weapons smuggling networks that surround the United States on their southern border and on their northern border. And if you look into this whole operation, it reeks of opium wars. And then, I looked into the operations in Canada, and the United States have a massive problem with the Canadian complicity, because let's say some of the Mexican cartels have very extensive operations in Canada. Sinaloa cartel is one of them. Then I think in the beginning of last year, the Canadian police busted a massive fentanyl lab in British Columbia. It was very, very large. And then we had investigations into money laundering, which traces back in most cases, it traces back to Canadian banks, BMO primarily, and TD Bank. And with regards to TD Bank, it's apparently the largest money laundering operation in history of the United States. And the Canadian government has completely dragged its feet, and it's persistently and repeatedly frustrated all efforts of U.S. Law enforcement to dismantle these labs. Nobody has been prosecuted, even after they found these labs, even after the investigation into TD Bank money laundering came out. Nobody went to prison. There's no prosecutions against anybody. And the only thing that happened is that the CEO of the TD Bank resigned, but that's it. That's all that happened. And so Trump doesn't mention this, except that after abducting Maduro, he just in passing mentioned, "Oh, did you know that a lot of these drugs are coming from Canada?" Anyhow, that's Canada is part of it, but there's a huge network of these international organizations, money laundering banks, offshore centers that are in in the Caribbean, 14 offshore banking centers where you have between 25 and $50 trillion sloshing around, and this is offshore dollars. So the United States government has no control over this, and it's completely untransparent. And then when I mentioned the international organizations, there's 76 international organizations that are granted immunity and tax exemptions in the United States, meaning that their archives and their premises are inviolable. U.S. law enforcement cannot touch them.
Under what argument do they give themselves this immunity from U.S. law? Sorry.
There's a piece of legislation that was passed in 1945, which is called International Organization I forget now. International Organization Immunity Act, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. And presidents, so under this legislation, the president of the United States, by executive orders, simply can grant these international organizations such immunities. And when we talk about international organizations, this includes the World Health Organization, this includes the Gavi Vaccine Alliance, International Panel on Climate Change, World Food Organization, and on and on and on. So these are international organizations that are covering, climate change, public health, regional security, all kinds of things, and most of them are pretty much on track to implementing the global goals the Great Reset, the UN Agenda 2030, and so forth. And there's no accountability by any national government in the world, including the US government. Okay, several days after abducting Nicolas Maduro, Trump announced that the United States would be withdrawing out of 66 of these international organizations. And I can't help thinking that this is somehow related one to the other, and that when the national security strategy document talks about dismantling the infrastructure of hostile powers in the region and reasserting the Monroe Doctrine, that this is what they mean. Because again, somehow through these organizations, offshore money centers, human and drug and weapons laundering, smuggling cartels that have flooded the United States not only with lethal illegal drugs, but also with literally tens of millions of illegal immigrants. And we're talking about the same cartels, right? Which are which are empowered by money laundering banks and clearly protected in Canada by the whole system. I assume that this is the infrastructure that the Trump administration has in mind. And I'll just wrap up with another observation because it's very much related. But we had this the grooming gangs affair in the United Kingdom, which almost died, It's been going on since the 1980s until mid-early 2010s. A few token prosecutions have happened. A few dozen people got put away. But we're talking about something that is the greatest crime in peacetime history of the United Kingdom ever. We're talking about tens of thousands of raped English girls, and the whole thing is completely covered up. Okay, I think that many of us knew this story. What we didn't know was that this story was very closely related to also drug and terror financing, because some of these same gangs that were involved with the grooming and with the rapes were also involved with the VAT fraud and all kinds of other frauds, which netted at least £8 billion. And some of that money ended up funding Al-Qaeda. And some of the people that were involved in this were related to the 9/11 attacks and 7/7 attacks.
Okay.
So the Times of London had a report on this in, I think in March of last year. And then it turned out that a special report had been drafted also for Elon Musk. And then we had Elon Musk, who suddenly weighs into these grooming gangs crimes and attacks Gordon Brown and Sir Keir Starmer. Because Gordon Brown and Keir Starmer played key roles in covering up these attacks, these grooming gangs and the VAT fraud and all of this. And some of the findings of the report that was prepared for Elon Musk, I have to read this out to you because it's actually quite staggering. So the recommendations: investigate state complicity in terrorism financing, whether UK government knowingly enabled VAT fraud proceeds to fund terrorism, and protect those responsible under the guise of national security. And one of the conclusions is that the United States has to revise its relationship and alliance with the United Kingdom. And then on 6th January of this year, inexplicably, Elon Musk tweets, and this was for a while his pinned tweet, a poll asking, America should liberate the people of Britain from their tyrannical government. Yes, no. So it seems to me that all of this is somehow related. I don't know how Nicolas Maduro squares in this picture, but in the end, I reached a conclusion that a plausible explanation is that Nicolas Maduro was extricated from Venezuela in order to preempt a regime change in Venezuela, because I think that what just happened in Iran recently was being prepared for Venezuela, that a regime change was being prepared. This is why they gave Maria Corina Machado a Nobel Peace Prize. It wasn't Trump behind that nomination. You know, he didn't lean on the Nobel Committee to do that. Because what happened is Nicolas Maduro got extricated, but nothing else about Venezuelan regime changed.
Yeah, the government, Delcy Rodriguez, is she's maintaining Maduro's policy in general. The government is still standing by and large, though different priorities, I guess, now are in play.
Correct.
So you're saying
and Donald Trump has on several occasions said, we're talking with Delcy Rodriguez. She's a very nice lady. We have a good cooperation, and on and on. So, you know, the facade appearance of things, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It doesn't make any sense at all to me. And
okay, well, sorry.
Anyway, you know, like I've been trying to figure out the points to connect so that the story at least has some coherence and some around some purpose that seems like Trump administration might be pursuing. Obviously, if this kind of a purpose is being pursued, then a lot of what is being done has to be done covertly, and it has to be, you know, they have to hide their hands. And I would go a step further. I would say almost certainly the Russians and the Chinese are briefed on this, or are even coordinating with the Trump administration. And then, you know, what was interpreted initially as an affront, as an insult to the Chinese, because Maduro got kidnapped right after, several hours after he met with the Chinese delegation, may have been part of that arrangement, you know, where the Chinese said, we need to take care of certain business, so don't abduct him today, give us the day, and abduct him tomorrow, or, you know, something like that. It's a guess, but it could be part of that equation.
Okay, so Hall, I'm going to partially throw it back to you to get your assessment, but I'm going to just tie in one additional question. Maduro did make the point before his kidnapping that 85% of the narcotics profits of the world go through U.S. banks. I read a book called Dope Inc. from EIR some years back that also corroborated that the U.S. banks make it possible for all of these international drug syndicates to function because they launder the drug money. I guess the City of London and the Canadian aspects of that also play a big role. But based on what Alex just said, do you find that you're partially in agreement, totally in opposition, totally in agreement? Where do you stand?
Well, I'll just talk generally. I don't know all the specifics of the drug trade that he's talked about, and certainly it's definitely worth investigating. But certainly from the perspective of Anglo-American relations, the British were never very happy about the America taking over hegemony. Right before World War I, that's what the Roosevelt corollary of the Monroe Doctrine was, to push Brits and Germans out of the region and assert American hegemony over it. That's the first point. And then that American hegemony was then reasserted in World War I for briefly, and then the United States pulled out again, allowing the Brits to kind of try to restore their empire, which failed. And then World War II came. And then we had the withdrawal of Britain from east of Aden. Now, my point here is that the Brits were responsible for the Iran crisis today because it was their banks that they did not want to share wealth with the Mossadegh regime. It was not the Americans. Americans were probably willing to compromise. It was the Brits that blocked that, and then it was our CIA who installed the Shah. So what the deal was there, I don't know all the secrets behind it, but that's one element where I think the Brits were at fault. And this leftover empire that they were trying to maintain, the Americans were at least a little more magnanimous or more willing to share the wealth than the Brits were, at least in the case of Iran. And this is where that's the beginning of the disaster we're in now. Then you have Tony Blair acting as what they called him. They had a terrible name for him when he was supporting the Iraq War. And now he's back on supervising the Gaza affair for Trump. So there's this British refusal of the Brits to really step back from some of this, where I think they should. And that there I tend to agree. But as I said, I don't know all the dirt that's going on behind the scenes with the Maduro case. I just know we did the same thing to Noriega beforehand, and almost the same scenario, except it was a much smaller country. So Venezuela is more powerful. I am worried about instability in Venezuela. I mean, how many 8 million people have fled the country? I saw them in Chicago in the streets. And Trump's trying to, where's he going to kick them out to? What kind of instability? Are these militias developing in Venezuela really going to create chaos if the Americans assert more power over the country? And how is Venezuela going to react? That's where a lot of people were talking about an Iraq scenario again, where new instability arises and chaos begins to. Because what else we mentioned? Why else attack Venezuela? It's not just at China. It's aimed at Cuba. It's aimed at Nicaragua, because the Venezuela is funding these countries. It's aimed at every left-oriented and even centrist government in Latin America. You had the right-wing take over in Chile just recently, and you have other governments under pressure because you leave the Bolivarian movement. If you can reduce its wealth, then it will be less influential throughout the region, and right-wing movements can more easily take over. So I see that in more devious or terms than I really think that's Mark Rubio behind this, his Cuban roots, anti-Castro. The anti-Castro Cubans who were exiled from Cuba are still very strong in American politics, and
that's true.
They differentiate themselves from the other Latinos, Latin Americans who came to the United States, who are not quite as willing to stage coups in Latin America. Anyway, so I don't know. I do think that Anglo-American problem does need Anglo-American relationship needs reassessing. I believe that. Where that goes, I'm not sure. Right now, certainly the Brits are caught between a rock and a hard place, because they see Trump. But first, they thought they'd make an alliance with Trump, and now they're not so clear if Trump will back them up. So
right.
They're looking a little bit more to EU3, Europe, France. UK, France, German connection, and sort of reassessing their decision, which I thought was a mistake to break away from the European Union. But anyway, just a few comments. Well,
yeah, no, I mean, and on top of that, now you have the U.S. has made the point that, and this may not be a bad thing at all, that sanctions against the UK are going to be, I think it's going to be 10% for a few weeks, and then it's going to jack up to 25% over the UK's position over the Greenland situation. That also applies to a variety of other countries too. Denmark, England, France, Germany, Sweden, Norway, Finland are all going to get hit with this sanction. We also hear, that the EU is canceling a major, $1 trillion trade and energy deal with the US no, not the UK, sorry, EU, and is canceling that trade deal with the US, or at least threatening to. Again, may not be a bad thing when you consider what's going on behind the surface appearance. But then the question comes, Alex, in my mind, it seems like we know that sanctions and the US dollar has been weaponized for many decades before Trump. That was like the way the game has been run and abused, with the help and often guidance of the City of London. Okay. But it seems to me that when I look at the crises, the outpouring, the social insecurity and potential turmoil in Venezuela, the organization of drug cartels, people who have no ability to survive, and thus they get into, the dark economy stuff. Same thing for the turmoil and social unrest in Iran. It seems like a lot of this is the consequence of the, not so much the incompetence of the governments of Iran or Venezuela, but more so this international sanctions by the U.S., the weaponization of the dollar that's kept these countries in a state of tension and turmoil and hopelessness. So it becomes an incubator for regime change operations. And it seems to me that simply changing that policy on sanctioning these countries would have been wiser, in my mind, if Trump had taken that up. Then
he's the one who destroyed the Iran Accord to begin with.
He seems to have taken pride in the fact that, his sanctions have done such damage to the Iranian economy. And it seems like, are you saying that he's not responsible for that he intervened in the case of Iran, as in Venezuela, from another coup or regime change coup that was going on that he had nothing to do with, and he intervened to stop those things from happening? Or do you think that he was somehow responsible, especially in the case of Iran, for the turmoil that was suffered most recently that led to, I don't know how many thousands of people dying by this operation? So what would you say about those things, and what Trump could have done to simply stop the sanctions, and why didn't he just do that to help their economy grow? That would have reduced the tension and reduced the ability for these nefarious operators to succeed in their ambitions.
That's all very hard to explain, and I would distinguish between Trump's first term and Trump's second term, because they couldn't be more different.
Right.
Remember, in the first term, he had people like John Bolton around him, and Mike Pompeo, and General James Mattis, and Rex Tillerson, Fiona Hill. All of these globalist neocons were everywhere around his administration, and they were pulling some serious weight. And then, when it comes to Iran, even in 2019, we saw British fingerprints behind the operation to get the United States to attack Iran, because it was in the summer of 2019 that the Iranians downed one of those American spy drones over the Persian Gulf, and then there was great pressure exerted on Trump to launch a bombing campaign to basically start a war against Iran, and he declined.
Right.
And then in the aftermath of that, we had a release of by Anonymous. We had the release of cables between the British Embassy in Washington and the Foreign Office in London, from which we learned that it was the British Embassy in Washington that was behind the lobbying campaign to get Trump to bomb Iran, because when he declined, then the ambassador at that time, Sir Kim Derrick, kind of went hysterical and fired off a whole bunch of these cables, berating Trump and saying how he's inept and unreliable and had no idea what he was doing. But he said he could be influenced, and then he said we have to surround him with Trump whisperers.
Right.
And we have to flood the zone around Trump with, to push him into launching a war against Iran, like he got pushed into assassinating General Qasem Soleimani.
Yes,
and so Kim Derrick was saying, another misstep by the Iranians, and we're going to be able to get Trump to bomb. not those exact words, but that, that was the gist of those. And then that created such a scandal that the UK had to recall Sir Kim Darroch and name a new ambassador. And so, looking at all these things and all this, because the pressure to go to war against Iran and affect the regime change is still on, and it's coming from several sides. It's coming from the Jewish Zionist donors and voters, and from the Christian evangelical, very, very powerful voting blocs, and probably from Wall Street, because wouldn't they love to get their hands on all the collateral that's available in Iran? But Trump has been consistently ditching them. How do you call it? He's been consistently evading that pressure. And back in June of last year, when it looked like he was going to go to war against Iran, I made the prediction: he's either going to not go to war, or he's going to launch a fake war, meaning there's going to be a lot of dust and a lot of fireworks, like back in whatever it was, 2017, when he launched a bombing campaign against Syria, and then it turned out that it did nothing at all. That he was going to do the same in Iran, and so he did. And I said, we will know for sure by the way the Iranians retaliate. And Iranians launched a very polite retaliatory strike. And then they all thanked each other. And then Trump said, we obliterated the nuclear program in Iran. Obliterated it completely. Why did he say that? He said that because the nuclear program in Iran was the pretext. It was the justification for going to war against Iran. If you obliterated the justification, then there's no more justification. And Trump said, we're done here. No more war. We move on to the next subject. And so when it came to this last war that was meant to happen last week, I was on a podcast with Glenn Deaton, and I said the same thing. He is not going to bomb Iran. That's my prediction. And then he didn't. Now, again, Trump didn't refuse to bomb Iran. He was saying, we're locked and loaded. We're going everything on. People were predicting that imminently this war is going to happen, 100%. Look at them moving all these bombers into place and so forth. Now we find out, somehow Iranians blocked the Starlink satellite system. I don't know how that works. I don't know how you block systems. But is it possible that the United States switched off the Starlink system? Maybe. I don't know. Then also we had all these Gulf states who had, you cannot use our airspace to go and bomb. It's in the sense like, now I'm going to beat up these guys, but then everybody says like, no, we're going to restrain you. We're going to hold you back. And then he says like, well, I was going to, but nobody would let me, so I couldn't. In a way, he gave himself an alibi. That is, the Gulf states gave him an alibi.
Right.
The effect, the outcome, is that he didn't bomb Iran. That's the outcome. And not only that, but he put Israel in a very bad place because they activated their assets on the ground in Iran.
Right.
And they pretty much burned that. They burned that card. Because their activation was supposed to be followed immediately by large-scale bombing by the United States.
Yes.
And so the Israelis activated their assets, and then Trump didn't bomb. And so what we saw is that the Iranians were able to mop up hundreds of these activists and Mossad assets. So again, that leads me back to the conclusion that Trump covertly is working towards the multipolar global order dismantling the old post-World War II regime, dismantling British assets. I also know very intimately the story about how World War III didn't break up in Bosnia very recently, last fall of 2025. And I have it from a member of the cabinet of Republika Srpska that all changed since Trump came into power. We'll see. I think we'll get a good measure of Trump because now he's being pressured to pick sides between Israel and the UAE on the one side and Saudi Arabia on the other side.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right.
And again, I don't expect that he will make an explicit announcement because he can't. He has all these. He has midterms in less than a year's time. And he has all these very passionate, very powerful, and very wealthy Zionist Jewish voters and Christian evangelical voters who are so zealous, so fanatical that if he doesn't support Israel, he might even get labeled Antichrist. He doesn't need that label going into the next.
That's for sure.
But by the outcomes on the ground, we'll find out. Did he side with the Saudis or did he side with Israel?
Right. That's correct. The Saudis and really going after the Emiratis right now and trying to back them out of Yemen and the Sudan.
Yeah.
And this is creating real tensions in the region. Ever since the Abraham Accords, when Israel and UAE linked up, there's the Saudis are now deteriorating against that alliance. Well, first of all, I totally agree with you. You can't compare Trump 1 and Trump 2, and I do agree with you that Trump has been at least trying to move towards a rapprochement with Russia and to a certain extent China in his own way. But once again, what worries me is there's so many other factors involved in his maneuvers that the effort to make those rapprochements gets jammed or convoluted in a way that he wasn't intending, and then he has to back off again and try a different approach. And that's where I see him 1 minute he's supporting Ukraine, 1 minute he's not, that's why these flip-flops are, in my view, are just so dangerous for provoking conflicts that he wasn't expecting.
Yeah, I think he's running an extremely risky foreign policy. Yeah. It's very risky. But we'll see. I think almost inevitably a lot of this is being done in coordination with the Russians and probably with the Chinese as well. This is why he feels so confident to do.
On this question,
neither Russians and Chinese got that upset about his taking the Maduro.
No, they're not. They're not. But this is where do you guys presume that there might have already have been, like a lot of people are talking about, we need a Yalta 2. We need a Yalta 2 to redefine the spheres of influence. Do you think that some sort of a Yalta 2 secret agreement might have already have been reached, and now it's just a question of piecing things together, or do you think that that's that's still something in the future or not even a good idea? Alex, sorry.
Okay. Look, I think that's entirely possible, but obviously we don't know because, there has been extensive discussions, cooperation, coordination between Trump administration and the Kremlin. And mostly it was done with the involvement of Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. And that in itself is strange, but I assume it's because Trump doesn't dare to work through other people. He is sending people of his own personal confidence, which then tells me that there are deals that are being struck that we're not supposed to know about. Like, okay, for one example is apparently at the last meeting between Kushner and Witkoff with Putin, and strangely, on the same day, Wang Yi, the foreign minister of China, was at the Kremlin, supposedly meeting with Sergei Lavrov. I don't know. Maybe they were all sitting at the same table. Some of those 5 hours that they were meeting. And one of the things that they discussed apparently was reconnecting the Nord Stream pipelines. And why would they be discussing that? Because it's between Russia and Germany, and there were no German delegates in any of those meetings, which tells me that, you know, there might be a Yalta II kind of framework, at least agreement between the three powers, and that they're moving ahead on that basis. And, you know, again, that kind of gambit would have to be done covertly, by deception, in secret. And so we don't know. We just, you know, I spent in the last, since Trump abducted Maduro, I spent many hours watching British podcasts and, you know, the Times Radio podcasts, all these, let's say, globalist neocon types. And because I wanted to kind of try to find out from their talking points, from if somebody's going to slip something. They have no idea. They have no idea what's going on. They're very clear that they hate Trump and they don't trust Trump, but they have no idea what Trump is doing. They just don't understand. And so how are we to understand? But, you know, looking at the large cycles of history and let's say at least foundational strategy that Trump and officials from his administration have expressed so far, I wouldn't be surprised that we're looking at this kind of a scenario where United States, Russia, and China are cooperating. The crosshairs are on the City of London, their satellites, their structures, their infrastructure. One of the things that apparently is going to has been was just declared is that they would defund, that they would break the financial ties for the Muslim Brotherhood, and that's again a big blow to the British foreign policy.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I would just add to
data
that.
points. Hall, go for it.
No, just that Trump acts as if he's got a done deal in Ukraine when he doesn't. But that would imply that secret arrangements may have been made that the Russians won't go too far to challenge the U.S. Trump position. But as I go back to my original point, you know, the recent missile attack by Russia, intermediate range missile attack, was right on the Polish border. And that's a big signal that something's going wrong there. And Trump better back off. And to my view is we'll look, February 8th is not far away. We'll see if they can make a deal. Trump still hasn't accepted whether he can just postpone the START treaty for a year. And the other point nobody's talking about is that Biden made a deal with Germany to deploy intermediate range missiles in Germany next year. Right. And no one's mentioning that. I don't see it anywhere except in arms control literature. And that's the beginning of what happened in the 1980s when NATO deployed its intermediate range missiles, Pershing and cruise missiles against Tomahawks, against Russian SS-20s at the time. So there's all these contradictory things going on. You got to play one against the other and figure out if you can make an arrangement with Russia. There, I'm in agreement with Trump. We need an arrangement with Russia, but it's so dirty and it's secretive. I can't tell you what. I don't know enough inside stuff to know what's going on.
Yeah, no, I think that it's there. There's so many commentators online who have these absolute statements that they make about exactly how you're supposed to think about our world situation, and it's people are jumping too quickly to make conclusions before just simply taking a step back and having the humility to say, I don't fully know, but here's my educated hypothesis based on the information that is available. And I love that both of you guys have that well-cultivated instinct to simply present hypotheses that are very, very well-informed. And we're going to find out. I mean, the world is moving very, very quickly, and more evidence is going to be piling on to help support the truth, right? The truth will present itself increasingly. My concern personally is that this multipolar system, you know, as I've said many times in other podcasts, is going to happen, but that the question is whether it's going to look like the type of healthy multipolar system that I love, of cooperation, of building the Bering Strait, of building trust over generations to heal from the centuries of oligarchical parasitism. That's not even a word, but this parasitical oligarchy that's latched onto us. It's going to take a long time to heal. So is it going to have that healthy type of aspect to it, or is it going to be premised on something? I recently revisited Orwell's 1984. Is it going to have that kind of contour of these structured, rigid domains of influence around that's a concern that I have. I don't know which one it's going to take. And
that's why I don't like the term multipolarity, if I may say so, because the term multipolarity in itself implies tensions between poles. And therefore, it makes it difficult to bring the positive. Multilateralism is a more positive cooperative term. That's why I use the term uneven polycentrism. And there's two reasons for that. One, polycentrism is more neutral. States can align or not align with other states as centers of power. But also, and this was touched on from a theoretical point of view in Alex's comments, states are not hard cores. They're penetrated by mafia groups, by multinational corporations, financial groups. You don't know that the guy you've elected in office is really acting for the interests of your own country, or is he being manipulated by some drug dealers or what have you? And that's this lack of a real hardcore multipolar. There's no poles anymore. They're all infiltrated by some sort of special interest, and that undermines the whole trust that you have in government. And the more I see that in everywhere, whether it's the so-called tin pot dictatorships in Latin America, or even our own country with the whole scandals surrounding Epstein and all that, you begin to see that there are nefarious forces that are intervening in our affairs. Yep. And mafia and drug cartels are certainly one of them.
Guys,
one thing
Alex, last thought to you. Go for it.
Before we go, the law, the legislature that I mentioned, it's called IOIA, International Organizations Immunities Act of 1945.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And the big one of these is OAS, Organization of American States. I think that's the one that Trump and his people are feeling a bit nervous about. Mm-hmm. And this is the organization that has been the main cheerleader in disputing Nicolas Maduro's legitimacy.
Right.
They're very powerful. They're very well funded. They're partnered with the UN, but they're not part of the UN.
Right.
And another data point to keep in mind that after the last election in Venezuela, which I think was 2024, the G7 gave a statement that they dispute the legitimacy of the election, and they don't deem Nicolas Maduro as the legitimate president of the of Venezuela. Mm-hmm. And they designated somebody else, not Nicolas Guaido, but some other man who is, I think, was Speaker of the Parliament in Caracas or something. So there was definitely, it seems that there definitely were plans and projects to bring down the Maduro government. And so whether I'm right that Trump preempted that or whatever happened there, maybe we'll find out, maybe we won't. But the dismantling of these international organizations is definitely taking shape.
Mm-hmm.
I just I'm gonna look more into this Organization of American States. It's not something that's really been on my radar, but that's very interesting to think of the infrastructure that this might have supplied to the building up of this deep state of the Americas structure that involves organized crime and other things. So very curious. All right, well, guys, you gave us a lot to chew on. I appreciate so much you offering your time up, and I
thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Alex, for your comments.
Thank you, Hal. Thank you, Matt. It was a pleasure as always. And until the next time.
All right, take care, guys. Bye, and thank you, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.